What could appellate courts do to improve their output? For example, do you think it would be wise if more appellate courts had a counterpart to Frank Wagner, your reporter of decisions?
Well, the reporter really imposes guidelines of uniformity to make sure we're all doing things as consistently as possible, as opposed to actual substantive clarity. One thing that's struck me as a judge, I don't know to what extent it has changed or whatever. We tend to have a fair degree of autonomy as authors. Maybe judges ought to be spending a little bit more time making suggestions on each other's work. We don't like to do it because we're afraid others will make suggestions on our work. But we need to maybe carry the collegial effort a little bit more into the drafting as well. Because it is an opinion for the court. It's authored by one justice, but it's the court's opinion, and we all have a great interest in the clarity of the language.
When I interviewed your erstwhile colleague, Judge Harry Edwards, he suggested that actually went on quite a bit at the D.C. Circuit.
It does in the D.C. Circuit. You know, it's a little easier when you're dealing with 3 people rather than 9, because the first thing that happens when you make a change that somebody suggests is that 3 people say they don't like it, and then you've got with 3 people it's a little easier to agree on the language. But that may be something we could spend a little bit more time doing.
Do you enjoy reading briefs?
If they're good. You know, it's a big part of our job. It's an exciting, when the case is new, you want to learn what it's about. And there's nothing better than a well-written brief. And it kind of carries you on. You want to learn more. You want to see what the other side has to say. But it can also be quite a downer to pick up a bad brief in a case, and you know you're not getting the right story, you know you're not getting the full story, you know there's more to it than that, and it's a struggle to get to the result. I enjoy it. I have yet to pick up the brief. I have yet to put down a brief and say, I wish that had been longer. So while I enjoy it, again, there isn't a judge alive who won't say the same thing. Almost every brief I've read could be shorter.
Why do so many lawyers want to run from their weaknesses and not somehow address them head on?
You know, it is exactly as you say. That is what tends to happen. I don't know why. I've often thought that the more effective oral argument, more effective brief is one that is more candid about it. I've seen arguments that they can be very effective. Somebody gets up and says, you know, I think the weakest part of my case is this. Or if you read this case this way, you know, as the opponents, my colleagues, my brother says you should, you're going to rule against me. Here's why you shouldn't. Or you know, get it right out on the table. What I don't like, and you see it in at oral argument a lot, is you've seen it in the briefs. They've got point A, and the other side has got, well, you know, here's a counterpoint, and you've got a reply, and then they've got a counterpoint. Then the person stands up at oral argument and begins, all right, here's point A. You know, as a judge, you think, saying, you know, we've been through that already. We know that there's a counterpoint, and we know you've got a response to that, and let's get to the cutting edge much more quickly. It does convey the notion that you're afraid of that. You don't want to get to that point because you may not be as comfortable with your answer there.
You seem to be moving the court toward less fragmentation, toward more moving to the point where the court can speak with maybe not a single voice, but fewer voices. And the whole Roman numeral system of non-headings that were just 1A, 2A, but no informative headings at all, really seemed to take off when the court was getting especially fragmented in the early 1970s. Do you think it's time to evolve beyond just the Roman numerals and the A's, and to put real headings? but not just the facts and then legal discussion, but maybe the kinds of headings that you would find it good journalism that actually say something about this section of the writing.
Well, it's an interesting idea. I hadn't heard it before. My first reaction is it's going to be hard, because what you're talking about is somehow summarizing what's about to take place, and it's hard enough to get people to agree on those 4 or 5 paragraphs. To get them to agree on something as an accurate summary of the nuances might be awfully hard. Maybe that's why it never really caught on. But I understand the benefit of it. Sure, it may take a lot of doing to get there.
Should legal scholars concern themselves with whether lawyers and judges find their writing useful?
Well, it kind of depends what they want to do. It's like philosophers who can write abstract dissertations that are going to be understood and read only by other academic philosophers, and if that's what they want to do, fine. If they want to have an impact in the real world, they need to appreciate that that's a different audience. I think it's extraordinary these days, the tremendous disconnect between the legal academy and the legal profession. They're two different, they occupy two different universes. What the academy is doing is, as far as I can tell, largely of no use or interest to people who actually practice law, whether it's analytic, whether it's, at whatever level they're operating, it doesn't help the practitioners or help the judges. Then the academics are perfectly free to say, well, I'm not interested in helping the judges or the practitioners. But if they are, they're not going to do it with the type of focus they have these days. I suppose it's a difference. You can decide whether you want to be an engineer or a theoretical mathematician or a theoretical physicist, and those are two different lines of work. But don't expect, if you're going to be a theoretical mathematician, to have an impact on how people build bridges. And if you want to have an impact on how they build bridges, you need to become more of an engineer.
Should law schools stop preparing so many theoretical physicists and do more engineers, if the analogy can be carried forward?
Well, most people go to law school to become lawyers. I suppose the really smart ones end up being academics and professors, and that's fine. But if the idea is to prepare lawyers and help lawyers, I think they could use a fair amount of teaching along those lines rather than just abstract theory.
Let's go to a very specific question. You're known as a stickler about the distinction between that and which. Why does it matter?
I think it makes for dramatically different reading. I don't know why, I couldn't tell you, but when I see sentences with which in them, it slows you down. It's a little more, it starts to sound like one of those old 19th century contracts, which and wherefore. It just seems to have a better pace to it. I actually find that you can usually get rid of both of them and go with a gerund that again is better for pacing. But which is usually strike them out.
Then there does seem to be a bigotry throughout the legal profession against the word that, even cutting that's that are sort of necessary to understanding the sentence. Have you encountered it? I haven't noticed that as much, but it's and I'm not an aficionado of the rules of grammar. Some things strike my ear differently, and that's very important. And I'll spend a lot of time trying to get a sentence to read in a way that seems comfortable and well-paced and conveys the meaning and isn't choppy. Is there any good reason in modern opinions and briefs that we continue to interlard paragraphs with lots of meaningless volume numbers and page numbers?
I'm familiar with your crusade in this area. I have to tell you, I'm not on board. It's partly a question of comfort. It's what lawyers are comfortable with. when I see a reference to a case, I expect to see the citation. It doesn't break up the sentence for me. It would, of course, for a lay reader. I understand that perfectly. It's confusing. They wonder what it is. But for lawyers, I think it's kind of the custom, and it just doesn't break it up for me. Now, maybe that just means I've already bought into a species of jargon that's become comfortable and familiar. I find it more distracting to be looking up and down little footnotes for the cite and the reference, as opposed to just reading along.
Well, I do, in fairness, not believe that anybody should be looking at footnotes. So I want to say what the authority is up in the text. But some people will inevitably look down if they see a superscript, I suppose.
Yeah.
There's no perfect system one way or the other. But citations have gotten longer and longer, haven't they? I mean, it used to be that a citation in the 19th century would be 12 characters. Mm-hmm. Now, they're 250 characters.
Yeah. No, you don't. That is distracting to me, and I don't like the stuff where, it's got 4 different systems in which you can look up this case. I mean, that is distracting, and I find the internet type sites obscene. I mean, you just look at all these letters strung together, and it's just a distraction. But yes, the more succinct, the better.
Are you still yourself learning about writing?
Oh, sure. And again, the only good way to learn about writing is to read good writing. So you have to keep up with that. And I'll see it in the briefs. I read good briefs, and I'll understand that's a good brief. And you'll try to think back on exactly what it was that made it a good brief, and the sentence structure and how it flowed together. And to a certain extent, your mind internalizes that. I mean, that's why I've always said the only way to be a good writer is to be a good reader. You can't do it consciously. You can't say this is how you need to structure a sentence, but your mind structures the words and it sees them, and when you try to write them again, they tend to come out better because your mind is thinking of what was a pleasing sentence to read and remembers that when you try to write. So yes, you hope you get better, and you can get worse. I mean, you read a lot of bad stuff, and your sentences and your paragraphs are going to get worse. So it's important.
What non-legal material do you read?
It varies. I like to read historical biographies just because I find those interesting. I'm reading a lot of biographies of chief justices and learning a lot about them. I like crime fiction, things like that. And again, whatever type of thing you're reading, you can tell good writing and good. It's a word I've used a lot because I think it's important. Good pacing. You can see that whether it's a thick biography of one of the founding fathers or the latest book by Elmore Leonard or something. The pacing, bringing the reader along at the particular speed you want for the effect you want is, I think, very important.
So when you're reading something as a professional rhetorician, you kind of step back and analyze even something like the pacing, or at least you're aware of it.
You're certainly aware of it. I don't think you step back and analyze it because it's not doing a very good job of drawing you in if you can do that, but you're certainly aware of it. Whether it's the shorter sentences that give you a quicker pace as you're reading through it to get to a particular point as the drama's building up, or a sentence that's going to cause you to pause a little bit more, to slow down. I am conscious of that.
Chief Justice Roberts, thank you very much for your time.